So you've just spent thousands of dollars restoring your sweet ride and your latches still sound like this. Well, I've got a solution for you. Let's get to it. Welcome back. Stupid crow. Welcome back to You Break It, You Fix It. I'm Jim Murphy, and today I have something very exciting for you. It takes a lot to surprise me and impress me in the automotive industry. I've been working on cars and building cool stuff for the better part of 2 decades, and I kind of feel like I've seen it all at this point. Cars that are slammed to the ground, 1,000 horsepower engines, trucks taller than houses. It's pretty hard to stand out these days. Until a couple years ago when a product stopped me dead in my tracks. It was so perfect and just well thought out, and it revolutionized a portion of car building that most people are very frustrated with when they're done with a build, and that's their door latches. Enter the Altman Easy Latch kit by Trique Manufacturing. Get these bad boys open. Let's pull you in a little closer here. Now, the interesting thing about the Altman Easy Latch, it was designed by a guy that was just as frustrated as you and me with the latches with a finished product. Now, here on the C10 build, we are putting thousands upon thousands of dollars into making it look cool, just to end up with latches that are clunky and don't close very well. It sounds more like closing the latch in a submarine than it does a custom truck. As impressed as I am with these latches, which are incredible, I'm even more impressed with Trique Manufacturing. When I called, I actually got a happy, pleasant person on the phone that wanted to help me out, which is pretty rare these days. It was just so refreshing to work with someone that actually wanted to help me out. That hasn't been my experience with ordering the other parts and pieces for this truck, and I just want to say thank you to Trique for being awesome and actually giving a hoot. It's come to my attention that these can be an intimidating install, but we're going to debunk that today. It's so simple that I'm actually going to reassemble this entire door before I show you how to disassemble it and install this. So we're going to warp time right now. I'm going to get the door back together, and then I will show you how to install these beautiful latches. And just like that, the door is back together. I want to get one more door slam in just so we can hear how clunky this old latch is. Thing wouldn't even close right on the first time. When you get your latches in the mail, it comes with very nice printed color instructions. They also give you a very nice template so you know where to cut the door shell. Like I said, I can see how this can seem like a very intimidating install, but it's pretty simple. And Trique has given you all the tools you need to succeed. And I'm going to walk you through this installation step by step, and you'll have nice closing latches in no time. The first thing we need to do is get the door torn down so we have ample space to install this latch, and that way we don't damage any of the door components while we are cutting the hole for the new latch. So the very first thing to come off will be this door panel. But before this panel can actually come off, we need to remove the door handle and the window crank. If you're not familiar with these, they are held on by, let's see if this will focus. They are held in by a little tiny, there it is, horseshoe clip that holds this piece onto the metal shaft in there. They make a specialty tool that you can get at any auto parts store to remove these, but my favorite tool is actually a little hook tool. With this hook tool, you'll be able to reach in from the side and grab the little horseshoe and pull it out. Now make sure as you're pulling it out, you keep track of where this goes. Half the time they will go flying across your shop. So just draw it out very slowly. And whenever you're working on anything, make sure you're wearing your safety glasses. You can walk with a wooden leg, but you cannot see with a wooden eye. So I'm gonna get these handles pulled off and we'll jump right to our next step. When I pull these handles off, I like to store the clip right back in the handle itself. That way I know where it is. However, throughout the teardown process, we will be cranking the window up and down a lot. What I like to do is remove this clip from the window crank. That way we can just slide it on the shaft when we need it, and when we don't, it's not in our way. It's not going to stay locked on there. It's very removable, and it makes it a lot easier. One thing I want to mention here is between a 67 and a 72 Chevy, there are so many different variances of door panels. Some have an armrest here that are holding with Phillips head bolts. There are a few other variations of these panels. Just take your time and you'll be able to look all over the panel and be able to find all your fasteners. They'll be easily accessible no matter what type of panel you have. One thing you'll notice as you start to bring this door apart is there's a lot of hardware that's very different and they go in different spots. My favorite thing to use to keep all this hardware organized as it comes apart, that way as we're putting this back together, we can find all the parts and pieces that we need, are these hard storage containers that you can get from pretty much any big box store like Lowe's, Home Depot, Harbor Freight, or your local hardware store. The nice thing about these is they have small compartments and big compartments, and our door, they even have compartments that are big enough to put our door handle in. The next thing will be to remove the screws on your trim panel. There should be just a few screws along the bottom, and the top is just held in by this molding, which that'll just stay there. We don't have to remove that. Of course, you can use power tools on this, but I would highly recommend using just a regular screwdriver first. Once the screws are loose and the bolts are loose, then yeah, go ahead, use a power tool. But you gotta remember, these trucks are around 50 years old, and who knows how long that hardware's been in there. And one tool you might wanna pick up before you even think about starting this project, because it's a godsend for a vehicle that runs a lot of old Phillips head bolts, such as these trucks, and that is an impact driver. This thing is designed so you put a Phillips head bit in, and it comes with a couple different sizes, which is nice because the bolts on the latch are quite a bit larger than this number 2 Phillips. But you engage it in the head of the Phillips head bolt and you smack it with a hammer, and it puts pressure in and spins it. Similar to a pneumatic impact, it works great on small engines like dirt bikes and 4-wheelers too that have steel bolts and aluminum cases. This will save your life. But I'll highlight this tool a little bit more once we get to the latch side of things. Panel is out. Now that our trim panel is out of the way, we can remove the metal window channel that is blocking the latch from sliding forward and allowing it to come out. This channel, this is the one from the driver's side, but I wanted to show you something just so you have an idea of what you're looking for in there. It runs close to vertical and it is in the way of the latch. There are 2 Phillips head bolts down low where it mounts to the shell, and there is one directly above the door latch. So we're gonna pull those out and get this thing out of here. There's a piece of rubber inside this channel that will need to be gently pulled out and tucked out of the way. Be very careful because this is old rubber in there, and if you didn't plan on replacing this weather stripping, then just be gentle with it. I am going to tuck mine up and pull it through this hole so that way it stays out of my way and it is not going to I'm not going to worry about severing this with a cutoff wheel when we open the door up. Again, I like to use the impact driver as just a screwdriver. It allows me to get a lot better grip and torque on these screws. And once they're loose, I'll go ahead and use a drill and zap these things out of here. In Trique Clicks instructions, they mention the fact that if you want to take this out, you have to remove the entire window and wing window. You have to remove all the glass in the wing window in that channel. I haven't found that to be true on mine. It doesn't mean that it's not true on what you're working on. So what I would do is do exactly what I did, pull this weather stripping, pull it through this hole so it's not in the way, remove the bolts. If this thing slides out relatively easily on its own, then great. You got lucky, yours comes out. Now, as you're pulling stuff out, of course, I mentioned my favorite organizing tool, but another thing I like to do is put the hardware back in the hole where it goes. It's hard to do with gloves on. Like I said, just for a simple latch install, there's actually a lot of different hardware in some of these pieces, and I don't want to confuse what goes where. I also like to put a little tape on there, make a little note. This is the right rear door window channel. And this will get set right in the cab. That way, once we have our new latch in, we'll be able to put this back in and there will be zero confusion about what goes where. Okay, the next thing that needs to come out is something very simple. We need to get our little lock button out of the way because this will prevent us from pulling the latch down into the door. And immediately after that will be our lock cylinder. Now this one's from the driver door, but this will allow me to show you what you're looking for inside the door. There is a little horseshoe clip that goes in behind this lock cylinder that holds this to the door skin. So you'll reach in there with a screwdriver or a little pry tool and slide this horseshoe clip out of there. Again, like everything else, just go slowly so you can grab this thing and so your lock cylinder doesn't fall out of the front of the door. So I am going to go yank my lock cylinder out. And just like I did with the last part, I am going to put my horseshoe clip on there so these are married together and I know exactly where it is. The next step, we are going to finally remove the latch. Make sure you kiss it goodbye because this is the last time it will be in the truck. If you don't have an impact driver or you don't want to go buy one, you can also use a number 3 Phillips regular standard screwdriver and just clamp, and then just use a vice grip clamped on here to give it some extra torque on this shaft so this will come out easier. Another tip with these Phillips head bits, I worked on a ton of old trucks like this and old Jeeps, and they all seem to have these Phillips head bits that get seized in these holes, and you'll either round them out or break the heads off. One huge trick that someone taught me was you can crack the bolt loose going forward. What I mean is you can twist it to the right before you twist it left, and that braking action, breaking it loose, will prevent the head from getting snapped off of it. So another silver lining to all this is if your bolts are seized in, we're not reusing this latch again. You can just drill the heads right off of this thing and pull the latch out and just be gone with it. No big deal. Fortunately for me, these bolts are loose, so I'm just going to remove the screws. Okay, look how nasty and old it looks in there. All right, now that we've got that out of the way, we can get ready to prep the door to be cut. This is the most intimidating part of the entire installation, but fortunately the brilliant people at Trique made it easier for you. They included this very nice template that we are going to cut out with some scissors. And all you do is align this top hole with the hole, I cannot think tonight, with the hole for the window channel screw that you removed. Keep in mind, this is the template for both sides. We'll just be folding this tab either direction. There is a dotted line on this template. Of course, this will not focus or show it, but we need to fold. But you need to fold that dotted line for whatever side you're working on. This is the passenger side of the truck, so we are going to be folding it so it fits the edge of the door shell for the passenger side. And when we go to the driver's side, we'll just fold it back the other way. Fortunately, this isn't a video on how to fold paper, because I would have just failed miserably at that. So this is going to give us a nice edge to line this template up. And then this top circle or top hole will be lined up with the hole from the window channel. Now, I didn't punch a hole in this yet because what I want to do is take my dirty finger and push on this into this hole and that'll show a nice edge of where this will need to be, and I'll be able to line it up perfectly with this circle. All right, I'll try to show you on the camera what I mean. Will it focus? No, it won't. Okay, but as I'm pushing it on this, it's making a witness mark on the edge of that hole. You can also take a pencil and rub it across there. You can also take a pencil and make sure this is sitting flat and rub it across that edge, and it's going to show you exactly where that hole is. Or, of course, you can cut this out with a razor blade, and then you'll have the exact hole that'll show you where that goes. But for me, I'm going to use my pinky finger and push in on that hole, and this will show me exactly where that hole is, and I won't have to cut it out. And then we will just secure this thing into place with some masking tape. I'm intentionally only putting one piece on here, and yes, this is kind of loose, but I don't want the masking tape to pinch this at all, and it's kind of an uneven surface. I want to just be able to hold it with my hand and trace it and make sure I know I have the exact shape. If you've seen all the other metal fab videos that I've done on this truck, you know I'm a huge fan of a scratching awl. You can pick these things up at any local hardware store. It's just a very sharp, hard point. Or you can use an old screwdriver and sharpen it. Or you can use whatever tracing tool you want to. I prefer these because it gives you a nice, sharp, precise edge that'll match this template perfectly. So I'm going to take my scratching awl and mark the outline. Now that I got my outline, there is a tab here, and that's just so it has a reference point off of this hole. We'll pull this off, and then we will straighten that line out right there. And remember to be delicate with your template, because for the driver's side, we'll just fold it back over that same exact line, and then boom, we have our driver's side template. Now it's time to cut the hole. What do we use to cut the hole? There are many options. You can use a pneumatic cutoff wheel like this. You can use a body saw with a metal blade in it like this. If you don't have an air compressor, they even sell a 3-inch electric cutoff wheel at Harbor Freight. My weapon of choice, though, is a 4.5-inch grinder with an appropriately nicknamed death wheel on it. If you use this option, make sure you wear all the appropriate safety gear. I'm not going to be using safety glasses. I'm going to be using a full face shield with a built-in respirator, because these discs are prone to explode. I've seen it before. It is not a good thing. So make sure you're wearing appropriate safety gear for whatever you're using to cut with. If you're using any type of grinder, like a cutoff wheel, a 4.5-inch grinder, make sure you're wearing a respirator. You do not want to breathe in all this old paint and metal shavings. You want to be building cool vehicles for as long as possible, so protect yourself so it allows you to do that. Now that we've covered all the cutting tools, another thing with cutting tools and safety using them, we want to be careful where our sparks are flying. So if you're using a grinding type tool, you want to make sure you're directing your sparks out of the cab as much as possible. Vehicles don't burn halfway. They burn to the ground if they catch on fire. So be very careful. Welding blankets will help you a lot. Make sure you have a fire extinguisher nearby. And lastly, on the precautions, be very careful of your glass. Grinding sparks will embed and burn right into the glass, and it will completely ruin it. I'm not reusing any bit of glass on this truck. The interior is completely out of it. I'm just going to be grinding at free will. Now that all that's out of the way, let's get to the main event, and that is hacking this metal out. All right, now we have a wonderful big gaping hole. I ended up having to use my little pneumatic saw after all to get this opened up. Keep in mind, this is an opening to allow space for the new latch to fit in. It doesn't have to be perfect, but get as close as you can. This truck is gonna get completely repainted, but maybe you just wanna put yours together to drive over the summer. I would highly recommend putting a little bit of paint on this edge. That way you prevent corrosion and also throwing a coat of paint on the latch surface itself. Now we're ready to set our latch in the hole for the first time. It did mention in the instructions that some trucks you'll have to remove this little tab right here, and I'm pretty sure this is gonna be one of them, but we'll see what it looks like when it goes in. Yeah, that edge is hitting the door shell right there. All right, so we'll pull this back out and we'll knock that tab off with a grinder. Another thing we need to do when this latch is out, we need to measure from the center of this bolt hole for the window channel down 3/4 of an inch, and that is our reference point for the top of this latch and tells us exactly where this thing needs to sit. Before I spray grinding sparks all over the place, I'm going to remove the latch out of this bracket because I don't want to get a bunch of metal shavings inside this nice new latch mechanism. Okay, we have our reference point marked and we have trimmed back this bracket. Look at that. That looks factory. It looks like it's supposed to be like that. And let's see. And it fits beautifully. Now what we need to do is get this thing clamped in place nice and solid. That way we can mark all of our mounting holes and get this thing mounted fixed perfectly. I have been doing body work for a very long time, so I have some crazy intricate vice grips, but a good old-fashioned C-clamp will work just fine. You really want to take your time and work on your fit and finish of this piece and how it fits to the shell of the door. Mine's pretty close, and I think once I get this thing bolted, I'll be able to fine-tune some of these stamping edges with my body hammer, and it will fit perfectly. So now that I have this thing clamped exactly where I want it to, I am going to mark all of my holes to be drilled and get these bad boys drilled. I am simply going to eyeball this with a punch and a hammer, and we are going to knock these holes out. The pilot holes look pretty good, so I removed the plate so we can finish drilling the holes out. I'm just using a good old-fashioned step bit to run these holes up to 1/4 inch. I'm using the short 1/4-20 Allen bolts, a washer, and a nut. I'm just going to go ahead and get all the hardware finger tight before I go ahead and tighten anything down completely. All these holes are drilled pretty precisely with slight variances in the holes. A lineup punch will help you get the holes aligned to put all the bolts in. Now that I have all the bolts finger tight, I'm going to go back through with a wrench on the back side and tighten all these things down. These things don't have to be torqued to 900 foot-pounds. They just need to be snug all the way around. Now that our plate is exactly where it's going to be and it's nice and tight, I'm going to go through and take a dull chisel and hammer in the valleys of these stamping marks, and that's going to make it seat against the door shell a lot better and give it a little bit more of a fit to finish look. Just remember, you don't have to hit metal very hard to make it go where you want it to, so just take your time. You can see I was slowly tapping in these areas, and now this fits really nicely against this door shell. Now that the door shell is all ready to accept the new latch, we need to make some modifications to the factory locking rod and the factory latch rod. Fortunately, again, the instructions are amazing in this manual. The first place we're going to start is with the factory lock rod coming off the latch. I'm going to pull the camera a little bit closer so you can see exactly what I'm doing here. Okay, we are up close and personal now. All right, on your factory latch, there will be, I'll try to get some better angle in here. There will be a little metal retaining clip. This will focus, please focus. There we go. Just has a double little claw thing, and it's open from the back side. So if you push this clip away from the latch, it will swing out and allow the rod to come away from its home there. So if you swing this out away from the latch, it'll allow the rod to be released out of the latch. So one of my favorite pry tools in the whole entire world is this little tack pulling tool you can get at a big box store. Warning, they are very, very sharp. If it slips, it will puncture skin. I have stitches from this, so be careful. We're just going to grab the edge of our little clip here and gently, you don't want to force any of this stuff. You got to remember, this truck's about 50 years old, so are these clips. So you want to use some lubricant on there if you need to. These, I think, will just come out quite nicely. There we go. See how nice and gently I pushed on that? Now this rod will come right out. Boop! And it's out. So now that we have the rod out of the home, we need to put a... Now that we have the rod out of its home, we have to put a slight bend in this so it lines up with the hole in our door and the new latch. Now, you'll notice it already has a bend in it, but we're going to be bending it on a different plane so it lines up with the latch. We are going to be turning it so the 90-degree portion faces down. And when that's down, this rod is going to look straight. You can see how, yeah, looks like it's straight up and down right there. That's the angle we're looking for. And the nice thing is, the geniuses at Trique provided us with this very nice template, so we do not screw this up. So this, we are going to put the 90-degree bend pointing down. This little hook's going to point down at the paper, and we are going to line the first bend up in this rod with the Y in this. Now in the instructions it says the driver's side will bend to the left, and the passenger side, that's the one we're working on, will bend to the right. So I'm going to attempt to bend this with my bare hands, but I'm probably going to have to put it in the vise. I got lucky and bent that perfectly on the first try with just my bare hands. Of course, you can use a vise or use a set of pliers to isolate the exact bend location. I just pinched it very tightly with both hands and gave it a good yank and bent it perfectly. So this is ready to go in the new latch, and what I would suggest doing is, so you don't get stuff all mixed up, is set the new latch right next to the old latch. That way all these things can be transferred as you go and you're not misplacing parts. So I've got the new latch, and it's pretty easy to figure out where the locking rod goes, because this lever swings, and that's what allows us to lock and unlock this latch. So we just follow this big lever over, boom, there's a hole in the end, and that is exactly where the rod goes now. Again, being gentle with these old retaining clips, we can just slide that off nicely, and that will go right on our new latch over top of this hole, and that will receive the lock rod. Line it up just the way we did with the old one. We'll line it up with the clip and make sure we lock the retainer. You can see those claws sticking out. Slide those in gently, make sure it's secure. Yep, good to go. You don't want to get your door all back together and find out that is not locked in securely. Ask me how I know. Okay, now the lock rod's ready. We need to do a little bit of work on the actual door handle rod. Similar to the lock rod, this also runs the same little claw style clip here. We're going to be very gentle pulling that out and sliding it open to allow the lock rod to come out. That came flying. Okay, we have the rod out. Okay, this next part is kind of tricky. You can see we have the same 90-degree bend on here that we did on the locking rod. We need to take some length out of this to match up to the new latch. We're going to measure down from this 90-degree bend 1/8 of an inch and mark it and cut it off. It's very important that you maintain the orientation of the bend in this rod. What I mean by that is this has to bend back the same exact way. So what I'm going to do to keep track of that is I am going to mark a straight line on the back of the rod, so I know that that is the back of the rod and we'll be bending away from that. And if you get confused, it's not that big of a deal because this end of the rod is bent at the exact opposite 90 degree. So if you forget which way this bends, just bend this the opposite way of the side that connects to the inner door handle. I'm going to grab my tape measure and marker and we'll get this bad boy marked. All right, I'm marking the back side of the bend so I know where the back of the rod is. You can see I have a nice long straight line there, so I know that is the back. We'll be bending away from that when we get ready to bend. And now we're going to measure 1/8 of an inch from the inside of this bend. You can see I'm putting my ruler right inside this bend. We'll make an 1/8 inch mark there and then we'll cut it off. Okay, we have our 1/8 inch mark. I'm going to grab the hacksaw and we will chop this bad boy. Now that we've got our end cut, we'll just clean it up a little bit with a file. It's pretty rough, and we don't want that to be going into our new latch. It'll make it very hard to get that in there. We are going to be coming down 1/2 an inch from the end of the rod, and that's where we will be making our bend. So I'm going to make a 1/2 inch mark. Okay, it's all marked, it's ready to be bent. The best tool to use to bend this would be a vise. Now, if you don't have a vise, you can simply use a pair of vise grips. It's going to be quite a bit more difficult, but I'll show you right here that's doable. And you just want to make sure that you are bending in the right orientation. So we have our 90-degree bend on this way, going the opposite way that we'll be bending our rod. Very important. And one trick here is we have a lot of leverage on this side. If we were just grab the end and bend it, we'd actually put almost a rainbow bend into it. So we want to be able to isolate the bend close to the vise grips. We still want to use that leverage of this big long piece of metal we have, but we also want to keep the bend tight to the jaw of the vice grip. And as we get closer, it's not going to want to make a tight bend. So we're going to grab a hammer and we are going to hammer this down to the jaw of the vice grip. Yeah, you can see how we're getting a wide bend there. We don't want that. Now we're going to take a hammer and smack that hard against the edge of the jaws of the vice grip. There we go. You can see we have our 90-degree bend. It's nice and tight thanks to the hammer and the vice grips, and it is doable without a vise. Now that we have a nice new bend, we are ready to connect this rod into the new latch. So you'll notice there is a lever sticking out of the latch that has a big hole on top and a small hole on the bottom. We are going for the small hole. And similar to the lock rod being nice and gentle, we are going to reuse our factory locking clip. Again, make sure all the rods are locked into place. You do not want these falling apart once your door gets back together. And we are about to fish all this back into the door. Now is a really good time to spray this down with some grease. In the instructions, they mention marine grade grease. I'm just going to use some rattle can white lithium grease and spray a little bit of that in there so we have good lifetime operation. All right, everything is all married back together and lubricated. And like smart people, we put our hardware in the holes where they go so we know where they are. So I'm going to pull those back out before we slide our latch back in. This is slightly tricky. It can be tedious trying to get all this fish into the door and back in its home in their correct places. But we've already taken all this stuff apart once. We know where everything needs to go. So it's just a matter of fishing this thing into the door. And once it's in there, then we can line up our lock rod into the hole where that goes. And once this gets slid up into place, we can start threading our bolts in there and start getting some hardware in place to hold this thing so it does not fall down into the door. So now that everything is in its home and where it needs to be, we can tighten the inner door handle mechanism in place and then move on to the next step. Before we move any farther, it's important to test the latch. This is the time to catch any problems. We don't want to get the new striker bolt in there or the new lock cylinder in and have it locked and have the latch malfunction. Now is the time to test it before we go any farther. So you can use your finger and push on the little claw in here. Get you closer. There's a little, black claw right at the end of my finger. We're going to be pushing that to the outside of the door. You'll hear 2 clicks. That's the safety catch, and that's fully latched. Back this up a little bit. You can see it looks like fully latched. Now we are going to test the outside door handle and the inside door handle mechanism to make sure that's functioning well with the latch. We'll do that a few times to cycle it through and make sure we're good to go to move forward. Just almost feels too good to be true. All right, one more time. I'm going to stop playing. All right, one more. Oh. Everything's good to go so far on the door. We're going to wait to reassemble it. We still need to put the lock cylinder back in, which that's what we're going to work on now. We are going to put together the striker plate that comes with the kit and the lock cylinder. All right, we're going to start with the striker plate. This is one thing that disappointed me in the kit. I kind of wish there was a marking on the plate that showed you if it was right or left or up or down or whatever. There's just a slight variance in each of the plates that made it kind of confusing. Maybe they're the exact same. I don't know. It's probably just me. But what I did was once I figured out which one went where, I marked a little R on the right side and L for the left side. These are going to get cleaned up and painted when the truck gets painted anyways, so it's not a big deal if we write on them. So basically in the instructions, it'll tell you that the striker needs to go, that your striker bolt hole will be higher than center and inside of center for each side, and it will be going away from the outside edge of the cab corner. So if you see the orientation I have here, this will be my right hand side. So when it's flipped, I'll show this closer once it's on the truck in the exact orientation, and I'll get a good close-up shot for you. Don't worry. I'm here to help you out so you avoid the confusion that I had. The kit comes with these very nice stainless striker bolts and a nice little tapered washer that goes on the bottom of that, and it gets screwed into our plate. And then on the back side, we still have some thread exposed. So what they provide us is this little star washer, lock washer, that goes on the back of that. And then they also provide a jam nut in the kit, and the jam nut will go on the back of that. And then we will grab a wrench and tighten this all up nice and snug. The jam nut just needs to be snug. You don't want to over tighten a stainless bolt because it will snap off. Stainless is harder than mild steel. It is prone to break, so you just want to make sure it's snug. And again, on this particular truck, this is going to be disassembled to be painted anyways. We're going to be doing a double check on the hardware once everything gets put back together after it's painted. So if you are painting your plate now, then make sure you do your double check of your hardware. Make sure the front is tight, and then tighten the back. So now we have our striker plate assembled for this side. We'll be putting that on in just a second. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to be replacing the arm on the back of our lock cylinder. This arm will not work with the new latch, but they provide us with these nice brand new shiny arms to put on the back of there. We're going to get my favorite sharp pry tool. Again, these things are dangerous. Put our safety glasses on. On the back side of this cylinder, there is a horseshoe clip. I hope that focuses. There we go. Now this is slightly different than the horseshoe clip that goes on here. It looks like you can see two little feet kicking up on this back side, and it looks like this should just slide right off. That's not how this works. There is an opening in this, there's a loop in this little horseshoe clip, and we need to push the outside edge of the horseshoe clip in towards that hoop. And that's going to allow all this to slide over this button in the lock cylinder. But there is a tricky little tiny clip. Hopefully this focuses. There is a tricky little tab that sinks down into the lock cylinder. It's right here at the edge of this. I don't know if it'll focus or how close it'll let me get. Ooh, it's gonna let me get really close. Yeah, you can see that little you can see a little crescent moon right there. That's actually a hole that this tab is into. We need to pry that up and away from this clip. Had to get a sharp hook tool. I'm not gonna lie, I think this is the hardest part of the entire installation. All right. Oh, I think we got it. And we do. Yes, that was definitely the hardest part of this entire installation. So all that will lift off. So all of that will lift off. And be careful you do not lose that clip because it'll be hard to find another one. Unfortunately for us, the new arm only fits on one way. And you want the bend to be going out towards the face of the lock cylinder. And we grab our pain in the butt clip. There we go. We just push that all back together and make sure the tab of that clip goes into the hole and locks in. Again, this is something you don't want falling apart once the door is all put together. That would be a huge pain in the butt to take that all back apart just because you didn't verify that this tab was locked in. All right, now it is time to put the lock cylinder back in the door, and remember we hung on to our horseshoe clip. It's with it, so we know where it is. So it's hard to film what needs to happen inside that door and to show you what you need to be looking out for. So I grabbed the latch for the other side, and the thing you need to make sure is that this tab engages this rectangular hole, and that's what locks and unlocks this latch. So we need to have positive contact between those two, and that's the only thing that matters. So when you're looking up in your door and you're fishing your lock cylinder in, just make sure this tab is lined up with that rectangular hole, and then your horseshoe clip will slide between the sheet metal of the door and lock the lock cylinder back into place. Now that our striker plate is all assembled, we are ready to pull out the old striker plates. There are 4 9/16 bolts here. We're going to pull those out and get our new plate put in. Now, as you're loosening these bolts, you got to be careful because there's a heavy-duty thread plate behind this striker plate. You need to hold on to that as the bolts are coming out because it is prone to drop down the cab corner, and it could cause damage to the outside edge of the cab corner, and you could just simply have a hard time getting it out of the cab corner, which would be a huge pain in the butt. So make sure you hang on to that as you're loosening all this hardware. Here is the thread plate I'm talking about in the back. Notice, like I said, I held on to it so it didn't fall down in. When we go put the new striker plate in, when you go put your new striker plate in, you'll just have to make sure you hold this from the back side when you start the first bolt so, again, it doesn't fall down into the cab corner. You'll find when you take your striker plate out that there are likely these shim plates behind there. The driver's side of this truck was in an accident at one point, so they ended up putting about 2 or 3 washers behind these things and pushing the striker plate way out. I am very happy to be able to get rid of these things back here. It just gives more clearance for that latch to close. So make sure you pull these off of the jam first. And if you're in the same shoes I'm in where your vehicle is going to get painted before these actually get secured permanently, you don't have to worry so much about cleaning all the garbage off the face of this B-pillar before you put your striker plate on. But if you're just rattle canning on it and putting this in just to cruise it for the summertime, I would make sure you clean all this off the best you can so that striker plate lays nice and flat. And even now, there's some gobs of seam sealer and all sorts of stuff in here. I'm just going to take a razor blade and clean that off quickly. That way our striker plate can sit nice and flat against here. The kit provides new bolts for the striker, but in my kit, it didn't have new star locking washers, so I'm just going to reuse the old ones. No big deal. and we will get one hole started, and we'll get one bolt started so that way that plate can hang there. I don't have to hold it, and we'll put all the other hardware in. Now I'm about to draw this hardware up just snug. We kind of want to leave it so we can tap it with a hammer up or down or in or out, whatever we have to do. You don't want to hammer these in nice and solid right now. We need to be able to move this plate around so it lines up nicely with the latch once we're ready to close the door. All right, I've got this to a good level of snugness. That way I can just tap this lightly with a hammer if I need to move it in or out or up or down or whatever I have to do. So now for a moment I've been waiting for a very long time, we're gonna be able to close the door. The most important thing to do on the first close is to get down eye level with this latch and make sure it's hitting the striker bolt perfectly. So just by eyeballing that lineup, I know that striker's got to go up. Like I said, these are just snug. We're going to be able to move it with a hammer and a block of wood. I wouldn't strike the stainless bolt with a hammer because it'll mar up the surface, and we don't want that. All right, round two. Oh man, that's awesome. We have a dead perfect lineup on the striker. Now that we have our height, we need to set our depth of the striker, meaning we need to go in with it so the door can be sucked in. You see, a baby could close this thing. Oh. Yes. So again, reiterating, the striker plate is fairly, I wouldn't call it loose, but it's snug. So we'll be able to take a hammer and smack inward with a block of wood on this and suck the striker in, and that will suck the door in. And as you're closing this latch, just take your time, make sure it lines up, just don't go slamming it. The last adjustment you made could affect how it sits up or down, and it could bash the edge of the latch, which you don't want that, obviously. So just take your time, close the door nice and easily, make sure it lines up. We are close. Okay, now that we know everything is functioning properly, we have a line striker, we're gonna go ahead and just tighten up the bolts to make sure these stay where they need to go. Now that those are tight, we are ready to start reassembling the door. All right, we're just gonna be going in reverse procedure of how we took it apart. Pretty simple, but maybe it's been a few minutes since you took your door apart. So I'll kind of breeze through how we're putting this thing back together. You remember we have our window channel, and like smart people, we put our hardware into the part when we took it apart, so we know exactly where the hardware is. This will just line up into its original holes, this whole top hole above the latch, and the two at the bottom of the door. And make sure after you tighten this in that you line up the rubber weather stripping in the channel. Make sure it's seated in there nicely, otherwise your window will roll down very, very hard. And like my advice always goes, when you're putting it apart, just get the screws started first. Don't tighten them. Don't tighten the screws as you go, because you'll end up getting to the last screw and not being able to get it in the hole. Again, we're making sure we're putting our rubber weather stripping in. That is good to go. Now we're about to put our trim panel back on. It's a really good time to check for loose hardware in the latch. We put a bunch of bolts and nuts in there. It's really easy to forget one. Just make sure there's nothing loose there. Double check the latch function now. One thing I forgot to do initially was check my lock function, which the latch has to be closed, both stages. 1, 2, now we can test our lock. All right, our double check is good to go. We are ready to put our trim panel back on. And now we're ready to put the handles back on the inside, and like smart people, we left our horseshoe clips in there when we took it apart, so we can just press the handles right on. That's it. That's on for life. Same with our window crank. And now's a good time to run the window up and down, check it for clearance issues. Maybe you bent one of the rods wrong. Things happen. And last but not least, the lock rod button. And that is it. I'm not going to do both sides in this video. We've done a really deep dive on the passenger side of this truck. You'll be able to reapply those skills to the driver's side. Exactly the same, but a little bit different. Let's hear that latch. I'm barely pushing on this. Just can't believe it. And that is it. I'm pleased with how simple it was to install these latches. Trick Click pretty much thought of everything in the instructions that any problem I would run into. I would say this is definitely achievable to do for any skill level. Even if you're a beginner, the instructions set you up really well. Now you have this video to reference to know exactly how to do it. Anyways, let's wrap this up. Again, my name is Jim Murphy. The channel's You Break It, You Fix It. Make sure you like the videos. Hit me up in the comments down below if you have any questions or any value to add to this. And this community has been great about helping each other out. I love seeing that. Until next time, I'm Jim Murphy. Keep your project rolling, and I'll see you in another video. You see, a baby could close this thing.